So I love this first reading because Solomon admits he's just a little kid without Almighty God. That's all we really are. We're just little kids, like when you're left home and your parents go out on date night, like my parents sometimes did. Okay, and once that door shuts and you hear the car pull away, we're all sitting there, 7 of us, looking at each other. It's kind of an uneasy tension. It's a little tenuous situation, like who's in charge, you know? And what are we watching on TV? Who's going to do the dishes? Like, yeah, it's a very awkward situation. And sometimes things get a little chaotic. Anarchy ensues when the parents leave. Famous stories in my household are of a mattress being dragged over to the top of the stairs. All the siblings sliding down the stairs on a mattress. Once dish detergent was put on the linoleum kitchen floor, and along with breakfast cereal, made an amazing slip and slide. Okay, these are the types of things my parents would come back to, and I was the youngest, so I bear no responsibility. I have no recollection of any of these things, but they happen. All right, so what I want to dwell on is like, look, you know, where's our morality come from? Ultimately, from God. So belief in God is essential here. Metaphysics, ethics, and understanding of who we are and what we are, anthropology and ethics flows from our metaphysics. What's a metaphysics? You know, metaphysics is like a theory of everything. You know, you have to kind of have some understanding of the whole thing. That's what metaphysics gets at. The big question behind the whole cosmos, okay, is answered by metaphysics, not by science. So those who say, well, I don't believe in metaphysics, like most of modern philosophy has thrown metaphysics out the window and say, all we need is science. Well, that's a metaphysical statement to say that all you need is science. Really? Can you prove that scientifically? You're making a statement about the whole thing. It's a metaphysical statement, an assertion that exceeds the boundaries of science, the laws of science. To say that all we need is science is a metaphysical statement. There's no way around it. Everyone has a metaphysics, has some worldview they're operating from. Some include God, some don't include God. Not everybody has to have a religion, but everybody has a metaphysics, okay? Everybody has a worldview. All right, now, does it include God or not? That is the question. Huge question. So I love the fact that Solomon here, you know, he says, look, I'm just a little child. I'm just a little kid, you know? He wants God to show him what's right and wrong. And God has done that. We call that natural law. We call that a conscience, the voice of God in our hearts, echoing in our hearts. God put that there. And we are not the arbiters of what is right and wrong. So I love the fact that he asks God to show him what is right and wrong. It's like kids ask their parents. When the parents come home, it's so nice after their date night, and, you know, we're all arguing. We're in our own little world, all the siblings arguing about what time we should be going to bed, and there's always one kid that's like, well, Mom and Dad said that, blah, blah, blah. And that should be all of us, you know. Should be reminding the world what Mom and Dad said, all right? Kind of a prophetic role there. But then when the door opens and Mom and Dad come in, isn't it amazing what a change comes over the whole house, the whole household? It's like peace, harmony, order, stability has returned because they have the rightful authority over this household. The siblings do not. So there's a great analogy in some ways here of the whole moral order. Our moral life down here flows from God. It's our job to remind the world of that. Because what happens when we forget that? When mankind gets too big for their britches and the kids start running the household and say, we don't need God, we can decide what's right and wrong. Here's what happens in the history of philosophy. You have efforts made by mankind to come up with a rationale, a ground for our moral reasoning. First up, hedonism, the pleasure principle. Okay, so we're going to decide what's right is what is conducive to maximum pleasure. What's wrong is conducive to pain. Okay, so that's it. That's about as far as we can get on our own. It's just, hey, it's good if it causes us pleasure. It's bad if it causes us pain. Or call it happiness, a good life, whatever that is, whatever that consists in down here, peace and harmony and freedom and independence, private property and whatever. Ability to prosper down here, I guess, that's happiness, constitutes happiness and from a human point of view. So yeah, whatever is conducive to this happiness is good. Whatever is not conducive to happiness is bad, but it's all very vague. People are going to differ about what causes pleasure, what causes pain, what happiness consists in or doesn't consist in. We're not going to agree. The siblings will simply not agree about that. And if we come up with some moral theory that's going to govern all human action and say, we're going to just say, whatever's the most useful, practical, bears the greatest consequences or proportionality of happiness or pleasure. All right. How are we going to calculate that, BTW? How exactly are we going to calculate that? Can't put that in some kind of mathematical equation. There's no calculus for that. All right. Let's put that in a concrete scenario. People get in all sorts of terrible moral dilemmas. Here's one that happens. Let's say you're in med school. Let's say you get pregnant while you're in med school. And then you're like, all right, this really throws my plans out of whack. If I have this child, there's no way I'm going to be able to finish med school. And the plan for my life was to become a doctor, get married, then raise my children. And so you have this futuristic fantasy about imagine a future, how it's all going to unfold for you. And there's lots of good there that you envision, that you intend, that you see there, a vision for your life. And it's to bring about good for many people through becoming a doctor. And then there's the good of this child's life. How are we going to weigh those two things? Really? It's playing God. We know from natural law it's an objective moral disorder. To kill an innocent human being is intrinsically evil. Okay, to kill a human being, directly kill an innocent human being, to take their life directly, intentionally, an innocent human life is always objectively morally wrong, intrinsic evil in any universe. Okay, because it comes from God, eternal law. From the mind and heart of God. It's imprinted on our hearts that we know this. So we cannot do that. But moral reasoning based on utilitarian thinking of just, okay, well, it's playing God. And you're trying to weigh these goods, which you can't simply put them in a calculator and say, all right, and come up with some answer that's really nice and solid and clear. It's not. It's not. We exceed the boundaries of our reason when we try to do that now. Morality, moral goods and evils, they get boiled down to personal preference or taste. When the parents are kicked out of the house, when the siblings are there, it's just ultimately whoever's got the power. Okay, might is right. And whoever grabs the remote first so gets to decide what we're going to watch. All right, so yeah, and it's just right and wrong is personal preference. Okay, it's just folk ways and mores and customs and, conventions that human beings come up with. I guess if you wanted to think of it in terms of some sort of evolutionary model, you'd say, well, these are just societal customs that have arisen to give us some sort of survival advantage or something. They have no bearing in objective reality. They aren't objective norms of human behavior. They're just things we came up with that work, okay, that help us to function and survive as a species, all right? But they could be otherwise. It's nothing necessary about them. Maybe we throw up our hands like some philosophers have done and said, hey, let's just let the state decide. We don't know individually. Let's depend on the state, the government, to tell us what's right and wrong. If they say it's okay, it's okay. They represent the consensus will, the general will. And we ought to subordinate our individual will to the will of the state. If they say it's right, it's right. If they say it's wrong, it's wrong. And we go no further than that. Uh-oh. What do we do when the government says it's okay to enslave people? Was that right? All right, you see, there's a moral order that transcends the will of the populace. Something can be wrong intrinsically, despite what we say. Positive law does not have the last say, the final say. Positive, man-made laws have to subordinate themselves to natural law, which comes from God. What else is interesting here? Natural law. Let's talk about natural law. What the heck is that anyway? The Catechism gives a good definition here, paragraph 1776. Deep within his conscience, man discovers a law which he has not laid upon himself, but which he must obey. Its voice, ever calling him to love and to do what is good and to avoid evil, sounds in his heart at the right moment. For man has in his heart a law inscribed by God. His conscience is man's most secret core and his sanctuary. There he is alone with God, whose voice echoes in his depths. And no matter how much we try to do away with it, it keeps popping up. It's like a beach ball at the pool, you try to force that thing, hold it underwater. It has a way of finding its way back up to the surface. Natural law, the conscience. The Catechism says that even when it is rejected, like we've done in modern society, throwing out natural law, even in our law schools, even when it is rejected in its very principles, it cannot be destroyed or removed from the heart of man. St. Paul certainly knew that. So he's arguing with the Jews in Romans chapter 2 here, and he appeals to natural law. This is a great description of natural law supplied by St. Paul. He says that when Gentiles who have not the law, the Torah, when they do by nature what the law requires, they are a law to themselves. Even they don't have the Torah, but they still have this law. St. Paul says they show that what the law requires, what Torah requires, is written on their hearts by nature. Their conscience bears witness with perhaps accusatory or excusatory thoughts. They accuse or excuse themselves based on this prior existing natural law, he says, is written on their hearts. Now, thank goodness in the United States of America, man, we got it. At least we got it started on the right foot with that Declaration of Independence. This line we're all familiar with contains so many truths in it. Wow, I mean, it's got a metaphysics behind it. Our nation was founded on a certain metaphysics, that there's a creator, and that there are self-evident truths. At least that's how we started. And it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Self-evident truths, sounds like natural law. Something that's true, objectively true, outside of our own subjective thinking. outside of the thinking of the populace, the consensus, the majority view, whatever it is. They're self-evident truths that are written, inscribed indelibly into nature by a creator. That's a huge statement that Thomas Jefferson made. An awareness of this natural law, final point, is it points to God. It's one of the important proofs for the existence of God is the moral life. We can look inside our hearts, and when we listen carefully to that voice of conscience and wonder, since ancient times, we wonder, where'd that thing come from? How come it's so universal? Civilizations, cultures, times, periods of human history, it's always ever present there that it's wrong to lie, cheat, and steal for the most part, and murder, and the golden rule. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Or the silver rule, don't do unto others what you don't want them to do to you. Okay, these things exist all over the place. Confucius said that, for crying out loud, in ancient China. So look, these things are ubiquitous in human history, this fundamental moral reasoning which comes from what has been written in our hearts that has to do with objective reality, and reality comes from God. So mankind can look inside our own hearts. Yeah, we can look at causality in the world and design and beauty and order, and all those things are good, proofs. They take you so far. But boy, this one hits us where we live. When we think of moral reasoning, where does this come from? This echo, this voice of conscience, this moral sense that seems to be inscribed in my heart. Where did it come from? Well, ultimately, it comes from God. And it points back to God.